So now let's talk about Michael Bloomberg's entry into the race. I know this is something your campaign's been keenly aware of. He spent over $58 million on TV and ad buys in just the last 3 weeks. Most of that money headed towards Super Tuesday states. He said he's going to skip the first 4 primary states. I mean, what is your view of the Bloomberg entry into the race, and how do you view Senator Sanders as an alternative to that?
Look, this is the problem with elites. He thinks he can skip Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, 4 states where you have to really interact with voters, where you're talking one-on-one in rooms, where you're talking about rooms of 20, 30, 40, wants to go out and just blanket the airwaves with television. That's actually a problem in this race. You want a candidate who can relate to the people, not one who thinks they can win by just spending $50 million, $100 million, $1 billion on TV. That's not good for the Democratic Party. That's not good for democracy.
But just quickly, as we wrap up here, one of the reasons he seems to be getting into this race is because he's nervous Bernie Sanders could be the nominee. I mean, how would you respond to that?
Yes, people like Michael Bloomberg should be nervous that Bernie Sanders is going to be the president of the United States and is going to tax people like Michael Bloomberg and is going to disempower billionaires who have too much power in our society. So yeah, Michael Bloomberg should be nervous.
Strong. That gives me goosebumps. There's something in me, man. Me hearing that, something in me that flowers and just blows. I think it's this open, brazen, unequivocal, no apologies argument about class. He's very clear on his intentions. And as he's stomping for Sanders, this is Sanders' deputy campaign manager, Ari Rabin-Havat. Rabin-Havat. He is very clear on his intentions. He is very clear on what he wants to accomplish. And Sanders has made a very clear choice to bring this issue on class and to fight on that very specific point. Think back, and think back hard. There is nothing in my 42 years on this planet that this argument takes place. I am unaware of this argument taking place like that, especially on a network like CNN. I get called all sorts of names. Communists. Somebody said that I'm their favorite communist, a right-winger, a socialist, all these things. And I think I've said on more than one occasion, I'm none of those things. I function from this stuff with a basic premise that I kind of expand out into a framing of the world. I may use various arguments in order to kind of go after a particular point, especially if I think the argument is logically consistent. But I'm not tethered to any of those things. I started to realize at some point that nothing really had any value. Like, when I was studying herbology, you can name all of these herbs and you'd learn all of these things. It's like, yeah, so what? It's like, yes, you have that knowledge, but so what? I mean, even if it's physics, even if it's chess, even if it's doing this, it's like, yes, you were able to be accomplished at that, but again, in the grand scheme of things, what does it actually matter? Now, the thing is, both points are true. It feels like it matters. So in some degree, I guess it does. But from an absolute point of view, it doesn't. The smartest man on the planet can stand on a rock and recite all the variations of pi and do it for 2 weeks, unceasingly, without sleep, given small sips of water as he goes about his way. And he can get eaten by a bear as the dumbest man on the planet outruns him to get to his house, where he is choked to death by the strongest man on the planet. I guess I'm making a point that all value is contextual. Meaning is contextual. All of that stuff. There's no absolute point of view on that stuff. The universe doesn't blink an eye at the most fabulous of feats. It is true that technology may drive us forward. I mean, people have various ideas, and those ideas get actualized into some kind of device or some kind of service that pulls society forward. But that's still contextual to the society. If that was Nazi Germany splitting the atom, how valuable is that to the world? My point is just very basic, and to be plain. All value is contextual. Even meaning is contextual. We choose. Now, this is not entirely true. I mean, it is true that for the most part, There is no absolute being that is imposing anything upon you. This is a blank game space. And as long as whatever you do is consistent with, you can say, natural law or natural order, then for the most part, you can organize yourself in any particular way that you want. But in this very particular, peculiar disposition that we organize ourselves in, we choose, and yet we don't. We are thrust into our particular society with all sorts of cultures, ideas. We have a body that has certain advantages or disadvantages associated with it. We have a world that has a particular clashing, meaning we're never a free choice. I mean, ultimately, your environment imposes all sorts of things upon you that are implicitly or explicitly accepted. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are driven into us that we don't even necessarily know that are being driven into us, even though we accept it as true. Our framing of the world gets set by the world to which we live in, and we may vacillate between one side or the other in regards to our dispositions, but those dispositions are entirely governed by the society where we are in. What does that mean for things like right, wrong, justice, fairness? All of those things, again, are driven entirely by the society that we find ourselves in. Now, the reason I make that point is because I want you to step outside of that. Meaning people hold on to various political identities and they fight for those identities. And oftentimes what ends up happening when somebody says, why are you X or why are you Y? They come up with reasons in order to justify X or Y. I'm asking something a little bit differently though. Step outside of that box. Meaning extricate yourself from that for the moment and just look at the world as it is. It's a planet. That's a real thing. And there are resources. Those are real things. And you have a small section of the population of that world hoarding a large share of the resources, like 50% or more. Why is that right? Now, people can make arguments about the capitalistic system, is this and that, but if it's allocating things in that way, meaning there's shortages in some, but not being allocated in others, why is that right? When Obama was in office, 95% of the income gains went to the top 1%. How is that fair? Whether you're a right winger or left winger, as just mostly a person, how is that right? Now think of all the things that go into making your society run. The people who keep the lights on, the electricians, the plumbers, the people who do your shoes, the haberdashers, the waitress, the person who pours your coffee, the electrician, the software engineer. All of these people all across the country, 300 million people, the share of distribution of those people that are required to let our society function as it does. And after all of that labor, all of that productive capacity, 1% takes 95% of the income gains. That is extraordinary. Why is that right? Especially within the context of what is required to make that work. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, $100 billion. Now think about what that means in regards to somebody who's walking around with that much cash in your society. You're supposed to have a democratic system, but all of us know that capitalism intersects that system, and all of us know that cash is one of the bases of our political system. So right off the bat, that cash is not innocuous. But even going beyond that point, $100 billion, that also means that in order for him to have that, he had to get it from somebody else. Is it right? Is it right? Bill Gates does not exist without the government. And I mean that from the standpoint of the money and the investment that we put into computer technologies, including from the standpoint of Jeff Bezos, especially Jeff Bezos. Because without us, the internet doesn't exist. Beyond that point, the cops to ensure his safety, the fire department to ensure that if anything happened, they'll put the fire out, the clean air that the employees breathe, even the education that those employees received, all of those things were complements of our society. It's amazing to me for one of these guys to sit on stage and say, I earned this. I earned $100 billion. I hate to tell you, there's nothing that you've done to ever get to the point of having that much difference between who you are and who everyone else is. And yet our society says, that's okay. I'm asking you to step outside of that and ask yourself, why is that okay? I mean, think for the moment. In order for Bill Gates to exist, in order for any of the Waltons to exist, Jeff Bezos to exist, they require people to work their factories, work their shops, and to do the labor. And they require people to buy their products. Not to mention, again, I hate to bring this up, but it requires a society that, A, gave investment into those technologies in order to make that work. Not to mention a society around it in order to allow that to come to fruition. There is no Bill Gates without an employee to allow Bill Gates' idea to come to fruition. Why should an idea be worth $100 billion? Especially when that idea cannot in any way come into this material reality without human beings in order to make that work. It's a shared process. And because it's a shared process, it seems weird to me that one side gets to expropriate 95% of the income gains and control the entirety of the process. I find that to be bizarre. How does somebody who is earning, or the top 1%, the starter of the company, how on earth do they get the ability to decide all of these things that control all of these people's lives? And these people, for the most part, have no agency in that process, despite the fact that he doesn't exist without the other people in that process. This world is strange. Now, I understand that the 1%er will look at this and say, this is fair. I earned this. I'm asking this from the perspective of somebody who is not a 1%er. And it is weird to me that people don't necessarily function on the behest of class, especially when you're looking for things that is in your best interest. The argument that this gentleman is making here does it for me. It does it for me in 1,000 different ways. Because to me, it's brash, it's bold, and it makes it very clear on where he stands. And it brings class, something that a class war. I mean, in the sense that people for 40 years had no idea that they were in a conflict. Didn't know that bullets were flying around their heads. And for the first time in God knows how long, at least my entirety of the lifetime, somebody brings it up. The issue is class. Welcome to the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. My just says Soapbox After Dark. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. I for the longest time, this has always weirded me out. There's no God imposing this upon us. This is to some degree choice. Now, I understand we're born kind of alone, afraid, naked, cold, etc., etc. And we're educated and indoctrinated based on parents, culture, all that stuff. And so I do get it. I even get that at some point back in time, there was someone with a distribution of power difference, meaning we're compelled by our needs and everything else. It's never a free choice in regards to choosing to work. No one would choose to work at McDonald's on their own free will. They are forced by their needs to do so. I appreciate greatly this type of argumentation. And I appreciate it in a sense of trying to change the consciousness of the public. Like this notion that somebody has to earn food is weird to me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against people earning a living. So, and this is not, get rid of cash and everything else. But an evolved society shouldn't. Do we value human beings or not? And if we do, then we should show it. There shouldn't be homelessness. I mean, those are things that we shouldn't necessarily allow, nor do we have to allow. We choose to allow those things. We, have governments. Those governments, for the most part, turn a blind eye, and we make the argument to ourselves, those people earned it because somehow those people weren't worthy enough or didn't do something sufficient enough for them to have somewhere to live that wasn't on the street. If human beings have value, then that value should be espoused in law. And I like the fact that this is being brought to the forefront of the attention, and at the very least try to get people into a change of conscience where they realize we're worth these things. Meaning we do these things because it's in the best interest of the society itself for us to do those things. Yes, we're going to get rid of student debt because it is in the best interest of the society as a whole for us to do that. We're going to get past Medicare for all because, again, it is in the best interest of the society to do it. You're a human being. You're an American. Congratulations. These things are your birthrights. Defend them and fight them. Fight for them. This is Sanders. Listen to the tone that Sanders is taking here. And again, it is a tone that I love. I love to no end. And he is doing this in stadium after stadium after stadium all across the United States.
They know we're standing up to their greed and their corruption. And literally, they're already figuring out what they're going to do. Are they going to leave the country? Are they going to get divorced? What are they going to do to protect their billions? But what we say to them is that we will no longer accept having more wealth and income inequality in America today than at any time since the 1920s. We say to the billionaire class, whether you like it or not, you're going to start paying your fair share of taxes. And when we talk about an agenda...
New York Times just wrote an op-ed, essentially the case for Sanders. This is a massive crowd. He is unapologetically going after a very specific class, the billionaire class. His front people, his lieutenants, have been talking about this open mouth, full-throated, no hedge. No hedge. What does it look like if you're Jeff Bezos or if you're Bill Gates and this guy calls himself a socialist, is running from pillar to post, screaming at the height of their lungs, we're going to end the greed and corruption. And you know he is a true believer. He's not bullshitting. He is a true believer. He is not taking money from you, and he is running a race that is a clean race. And you know what he's going to do when he gets in office. You know it. In fact, maybe you don't know it. Maybe that's even worse. And he's rallying a public to have public will for that. What does it look like? What does it look like? Do you think Bloomberg is getting in that race for his health? This is a vanity project, but it's a vanity project because he is terrified of what is going to happen if Sanders gets in office. Bezos pushes Bloomberg because Bezos also knows and is terrified of what's going to take place. Bill Gates is talking about it because, again, Bill Gates is terrified of this notion of the wealth tax. So is, what is that guy named? Cooperman, the one that was crying on air. I've never seen a campaign do this. I am stunned. I've never seen a campaign do this. I pride in this. I love this. Because, look, if you're going to... And by the way, one last point. He says, what are they going to do? Are they going to leave? And I love this taunting effect. What are you going to do? You're going to leave the country? Maybe not leave the country, but there's another option. You know, we have used fascists in other countries to suit our ends. Meaning we've used fascists to push back against lefty governments when it suited their ends, especially oligarchs. The rich in this country are not hurt by Trump being in office. Bloomberg is not hurt one iota with Trump being in office. Now there's Bezos, now there's Gates, none of these guys. Nancy Pelosi with $100 million is not hurt by Trump being in that office. The catch here is what he says, what are they going to do? It may not necessarily have to be anything of this notion of leaving the country or anything else. But are coups beyond the pale? Look at what took place in Bolivia. That president was popular. That president won that distribution by 10 points. And they still, the oligarchs, the fascists, were able to come together, join hands in order to get him out of office. Does $100 million count as an oligarch? Like Pelosi? And you hear Obama working behind the scenes? If I was Bernie Sanders and I was in his war room, I would tell him to assume that everybody in that race that is not named Bernie Sanders is one candidate. and that all of them, as that one candidate, are out for him, because it's impossible for him to know if they're not. He knows that they don't like him. He knows that they don't consider him a Democrat. Buttigieg, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi were at those anti-Sanders meetings in order to stop Sanders. Now, Warren, who's friends with Clinton, and we know Obama has a tendency to push people into the race or this kind of element of the Democratic Party, these third way. I would not be shocked if Warren got into this race in order to ding Sanders. He cannot consider anybody in this race a friend of his, despite the optics that he may have to put on when he's dealing with the press and everything else. Yeah. He can't, let me just say it this way. He can't assume that the rule set is going to remain the same. Meaning you've had an oligarchic class that for the most part has had the say on both parties. Capture both. And in capturing both, all of the main economic issues that Sanders is bringing up, these class arguments, get pushed to the wayside as for the most part settled. I mean, the overwhelming majority of stuff gets agreed upon. And then you have these culture war issues. Well, this guy's bringing back in the class issue. And after having power all of that time, what do you do and how far do you go to maintain your, let's say, maintenance of power in this case? And I don't know. It's possible that the rules change. Meaning, yeah, we're going to follow the rules as long as we're in control. And the moment that this changes on us, the rules change. We no longer need or feel the need to be bound by the rule set to which we've organized ourselves. I would love to have this conversation with Chris Hedges, because Bolivia has freaked me out royally on this. Extreme Chucka, educate folks, Jamal, speak about Marxist theory. I can't go into Marxist theory, I only know a bit of it. Donald Smead, funny how these billionaires want to use our military to enforce their contract whims but don't want to pay their taxes. Isn't that peculiar, right? I mean, this is kind of my point. You found yourself in a society, and it's not that I'm thinking in terms of taxes. I'm thinking in terms of if a company is in existence, the employees have say-so within the context of that company, that this is an equal party of sorts. I don't care if people get a bit more. What Bill Gates have done what Bill Gates did for $500 million, I think so, especially if the skew and the way that wealth was being distributed was different. You would think $500 million was a bee's knees, as opposed to the $100 billion that he has. That is money that is not going into the pockets of workers. That is money that is raising the rates of the various things that people use. And more important, that is money that is not in the coffers that can be used at the interests of the population itself. Which is what my argument basically boils down to, is that government should be used at the behest of the population, not at the behest of a tiny 1%. And to have the population organized around that. I don't right, left, or somewhere in between. Corruption should not be part of our government. And if nothing else, the tip of the spear should be to eliminate this notion of buying our politicians. It's a corrupt, gross way of politics that we allow that. All right. No, Chris Hedges. All right, I'm going to end this because I have like a slew of these that I wanted to do. Chris Hedges is really good. He's gotten gloomy these days, but he's really good. He's still awesome, Adam Bell. Pretty excited to have Jamal do a daily show. Victor Surge. I'm excited too. I'm worried slightly. You know, it's kind of like a dog chasing a car. The moment that you catch the car, it's like you don't know what to do with it. I went to Sputnik over the course of like the 2 years. And it never occurred to me, or it didn't occur to me initially, of it being signed on. It was just kind of a thing to the radio spot. But after going on for a while, especially co-hosting, I actually enjoy radio. It's fun. I have a good time doing it, especially when I can kind of make my own point of view. It forces you to be somewhat of an instructor, to, faster and all of that type of stuff. And I realized when, or at the very least it started to sink in, that when you're trying to explain to people what you're doing, the level of demonization from the standpoint of Russians, especially from the standpoint of Democrats, it's like, it's like you have this extra thing in your head. It's not a clean win. Meaning, you got the job, yes. You got the job based on skill, yes. You got that job over other people, and they chose you, so gold star for that one. But because it's a Russian network, when you tell people Sputnik, they're like, oh, is that that Russian network? It's like, yes. And immediately you know what they're thinking. I don't know. It's a weird, yeah, it's just weird. And then having it's like there's certain people that you might want to interview where you're like, okay, I can't interview that person because they're going to say that the Russians are trying to go after so-and-so. It's like that nonsense. I would quit that job on the spot if I thought I was being imposed upon. And part of the reason that I keep this channel is to prevent any hedge on that front. Like, I am okay. I'm not starving. And even though this is nice, I could give it up if I thought it was a conflict of interest. By the same token, that doesn't really matter. You're still going to get tarred and called names, despite the fact that Larry King, Chris Hedges, and what's the other cat? Thomas Hartman even used to be on RT. It's a network for lefties. I mean, ultimately, lefties don't end up on mainstream media because we take an anti-war tint. Well, RT takes an anti-war tint also. And so you have people whose interests converge, and they're like, well, fuck yeah, if you're going to give me a platform, we're going to take the platform. Even Galloway, for that matter. And so it's this thing of, yes, accomplishment. I mean, especially after doing this for so many years. And if you look back at my old shows, persistently getting better at it. This like whittling away, getting your brain just kind of working a particular way. By the same token, uncertain of what it means entirely to work at Sputnik. I don't know. I'm excited, but it's like a lot of stuff all at once. Jamarl 2024. Now I can't run for politics. If the United States would do its job, there would be no space for Sputnik. Yes, that's true, Garnome. But we don't have a anti-establishment media outlet. I mean, the Young Turks, for all intents and purposes, it's just MSNBC light. They can't call themselves anti-establishment. And you get a rowdier bunch that is ferociously anti-war on these sort of networks. And, for the most part, they allow you to speak your piece in a way that, I mean, I haven't been on any other network, so I don't necessarily know, but I've heard bad things. All right. Solix, CYT makes me pee. Now I got to pee. That's funny. Microsoft Word technical support. I know my opinion is incorrect. In the same way, a good scientist knows that they will never know everything and therefore will never be perfectly correct. Yes. Somebody said, so you're in the business of truth. I was like, well, truth is difficult. Because, it's like, what's truth? Truth is not, they're not absolutes. That makes it difficult. Jody Havel. Congratulations. Wow, thank you. All right. Like, share, subscribe.